Welcome back. So in this lesson, I want us to set up flags so that we can provide the parameters that our limiter needs on the command line. So let's go ahead and do that. If you recall, it's a command pattern. We will need to go to the main.go file, and we will need to include flags. Okay, so let's go about doing that. Okay, so before I can add flags, I need somewhere to store the variables for the flags, and so we will put them in the config struct. So currently we have port, environment, and the parameters for the database connection. And so right after this, I'm going to create a new field, and I'm going to call this field limiter. Okay, and this field, of course, will be a struct, and the fields that this struct contains will be RPS, how many requests per second will be allowed after the initial burst, and this will be, of course, a float 64. Okay, so requests per second. Okay, so we also need the burst, which is how many requests we can handle at the initial moment. All right, and then we need one more field, and this field is to specify whether we want to turn on or turn off rate limiting. Sometimes we want to turn off rate limiting when we want to do some testing. All right, and so we want to provide the option to quickly turn it on or turn it off. All right, that's all we need. RPS, burst, and enable. So these are the three fields that the limiter type contains. So what we will do? Well, we will need to include flags right down here. And so let's put this down, and let's include flags for the rate limiter. So these are flags for the rate limiter. Okay, so this is easy enough. So it's going to be flag, and the first value is going to be float. So we're going to have float 64 and var, right? And so we will store that flag in, of course, cfg limiter.rps, and the name, of course, will be limiter -rps. Okay, so that's what we have to include. All right, and the default will be 2, right? Just like what we're used to. And the message will simply be rate limiter maximum request per second. Okay, all right, that's that. Let's move on to the next one. I think I'll just copy and paste. Of course, the next one will be an int var. Okay, and that will be stored in burst. Okay, and so we're going to simply have limiter that burst as the name, and of course we're going to put that to 4, and then we're going to have a message as rate limiter maximum burst. right? Okay, and finally we need a bool flag to be able to turn on and turn off rate limiting. And so we will call that bool, and that will be stored in enabled, and the name will be limiter enabled, right? And the default will be true. So by default it will be on. And so if you want to turn it off, we'll have to set it to false when we're starting the server. And then we'll simply have the message enable the rate limiter. Okay. All right, so that's all we need. And so what we have to do now is to go back to our rate limit function, and we will have to incorporate these new flags. So what I want to do is to simply say okay, right here, right, I will only do all of this if the excuse me, if the rate limiting enabled flag is on. Alright, and so that's easy enough. All I have to do is to just do an if. Okay, so if app that config that limiter that enabled, then I want to do all of this. So let me put that in here. Okay, I will want to do all of this. Okay, and of course, if I will be running the rate limiter or enabling the rate limiter, then I no longer will be using rate that new limiter 2, 4. I have to change these to the values that have been passed in. So let me put this on a new line, and let me simply say the first one will be we need a R, that's our RPS, and we need a B, which is our burst. So R is of type rate limit, however we have int 64. So easy enough, we can just convert that to our rate limit, right? So rate that limit is a type, and so we're going to use that, right? And what it will do is to simply return a rate limit, a limit, right? So we're going to simply say app that config that limiter that RPS. All right, and so we have our float 64 becoming a limit, because that's what is expected. New limiter expects a rate that limit type. All right, so once you have that, we will then include app that config that limiter that burst, all right, which would be config limiter. Oops, I spelled config wrong again. CONFIG that limiter that burst. Okay, don't forget the comma at the end. Okay, so if rate limiter is enabled, then we will do what we usually do. All right, so that will end here. So this will be the end of enabled conditional. Okay, so again, this is a conditional, so this will be executed or not. And for example, if it is disabled, meaning if it's false, then we will simply return by calling the next handler. That's it. All right. Okay. Great. So let's test this out. All right. Let's test this out. Okay. I'm gonna start, and let's well, I didn't enable anything, so I expect that when I run, it's gonna do the same. Okay, so let me restart the server, but this time I will say that the limiter dash burst is 2. Okay, so I expect only 2 requests to be handled. All right, so number 1, number 2. All right, let's restart the server again, but this time we're going to turn off rate limiting. So limiter dash enabled is false. And let's see. So we're going to run the 6 again, and all of them should be accepted. All right, all 6 of them were accepted. Okay. So there we have it. We are now able to configure our rate limiter from the command line. Okay, so we'll leave it here. In the next section, we will start looking at how to gracefully shut down our service. So as you saw me doing just now, when I want to terminate the server, I do Control-C. Okay, but that's not the best approach, because there might be requests that are being processed or being accepted. Responses are probably being prepared. The database might be running queries, and so if we do a Control-C, which is a hard shutdown, then we leave the system in sort of an inconsistent state, and also the client doesn't really get an acknowledgement as to what happened. All they know is the connection was lost. That's it. So our job is to ensure that before we shut down the service, we ensure that things are handled properly. We ensure that things have been cleaned up. All pending requests are completed. The system is in a good state, and then we can shut down. I'll see you in the next lesson where we discuss that and write some code to implement the shutdown, the graceful shutdown functionality.